So I guess I'll just jump into this live as well. So since this is supposed to be another Q&A session, but we'll see if anybody shows up today. I figured I'll just kind of talk about the process of getting chickens and kind of deciding how you want to start your flock. Kind of one of the first things I always tell people is know your chickens, know the anatomy of chickens, know different breeds. Kind of some are more for meat, some are more for eggs, some are dual purpose. So you'll have to decide what purpose these chickens are going to serve your homestead. For us, our chickens are not just for eggs, but they are for meat, as well as they help to take care of the ground. And a lot of people know who have chickens that they will destroy any ground that they are on for a long period of time. So in the sense of helping taking care of the ground, we rotationally graze our chickens. So their coop is moved every so often. It kind of just depends on the patch of ground they're on. But they till the soil a little bit, they scratch in their manure, they pick bugs and such out of the dirt, and they kind of, they just fertilize and kind of agitate the soils, flip it around, bury seeds, and then once the ground gets to a point, we move those chickens. So they're kind of for food as well as our kind of soil preppers, so to say. They kind of help prep the soil before we decide to plant certain things. Especially if I have chicks, I'll have them in a little pen and I'll scooch them along like a garden bed space. So they get to kind of prime the garden bed space. But once you figure out what you want your chickens for, some people just want to have them as pets, which is great. But once you decide, thank you guys for joining. I'm glad you enjoy my content. And so we don't raise meat chickens like the specific Cornish cross meat chickens. I have in the past, but just me personally, I don't really like the Cornish cross. I don't feel they're just kind of a funky Franken chicken. They have been bred to grow extremely fast, and with them growing extremely fast, it can be very hard on their systems. And if you're not familiar with raising meat chickens, they tend to have heart attacks pretty often. Sometimes their feathers are very funky. They eat a ton. Like, that's literally all these chickens do is just eat and eat and eat. So I myself am not a huge fan of the specific meat birds like the Cornish cross, but I do raise dual purpose meat breeds, so they don't get as big and chunky as the Cornish crosses, but whenever we need or want some chicken, they do very well to supply us with very good chicken. And I have found that I like the taste of like a dual purpose meat bird more than I like the taste of like the Cornish crosses. Like, the best way I can describe it is like the Cornish cross is almost like a watered down chicken flavor versus a dual purpose meat bird. They have a more chickeny flavor. So there's several reasons I do enjoy dual purpose meat birds or dual purpose birds for eggs and meat versus the Cornish cross. But it's definitely kind of to everyone's discretion, in the sense like you kind of have to experience raising meat birds versus raising maybe a dual purpose and kind of figuring out what you like better. So I definitely have raised them. I myself don't recommend them particularly, but for people who want to raise a bunch of chickens, harvest them all at once to have lots of chicken, they are really good breed for that. The Cornish crosses are. Versus dual purpose, you kind of have to kind of delegate which chickens you're going to eat and which ones you want to keep for laying. And for us, I hatch out a lot of chicks, so roosters tend to be the meat bird, and then the hens are the eggs. But every now and again I do harvest a hen. Usually for soups, I like older hens. They have more flavor, they're denser in nutrition, And I try not to harvest too many younger hens because I want eggs from them first, if that kind of makes sense. Yes, starting with like kind of chickens as pets is definitely a great way to start. Um, Hold on. I got a kitty playing with my iPhone stand. um, uh, yeah, so starting out with some pets is definitely a great option. It gives you a really good idea on just kind of how to care for a couple of chickens, because a couple of chickens is almost the same amount of work as taking care of many chickens, but it's more kind of the expenses, I would say, is what is more when you get more birds. But definitely starting out with just some pets is definitely great. I definitely love little mini chickens, but I have found that it does depend on kind of your climate and your area. The smaller the chicken, they tend to be a little more tender and sensitive to like hot and cold. So those are things to keep in mind, even if you just have them as pets. But it's definitely a good place to start with some little pet birds and then seeing if you want to work up to more or bigger birds. So that's definitely a great idea, especially if you're getting back into them. Just helps you like reacclimate to the aspect of having some chickens. I am not Mongolian. I'm very mixed. I'm Nigerian, Egyptian. There's some other like mixed in there, but then that's like on the black side of my family. And then I'm very Irish, German, Polish, Scottish. So there's a lot mixed in there. So I definitely get that a lot, trying to figure out what ethnicity I am, and not that I'm all of them, but I'm many of them. I love rabbits. I definitely, the only issue, I don't, it's more of a personal issue with rabbits, that I don't like the caged setup myself. Like, I'm not dogging on them being in cages. That's just not my preference. I would prefer colony style, but colony style can be a little tricky. But rabbits are definitely a great way to provide protein to your family on the homestead. They make, their poop is really great to compost. You can use their hides for making pelts and clothing and mittens, and they're very soft and awesome. They're pretty easy to raise too. There are some kind of nuances that you do kind of have to work with when it comes to rabbits, because they can be very territorial. They can actually very much hurt each other. I mean, it's kind of the same with chickens, but rabbits, when it comes to kind of the breeding process. And then I guess the one thing about rabbits is that their babies are a little harder kind of to take care of than like say chicks, because rabbits need their mom for milk versus chicks, they don't really need mom in that same fashion. But I think rabbits are a great animal to raise for meat or pets, kind of whichever way you want to do it, as well as in kind of just how I've read and researched in the few rabbits that I have raised. Like in the past, I did have meat rabbits, but I kind of realized that wasn't something I really wanted to do quite yet. But they're less expensive in certain ways. Like the full setup is probably as expensive as if you're doing a full setup for chickens. But once you get kind of past that major like money spending hurdle, it's hay and pellets, and depending on how you do it, you can grow a huge majority of their feed, so that can be a little cheaper. But I definitely recommend rabbits as well. Like there's kind of the argument which is better, chicken or rabbits, and I think they both are pretty equal. It just kind of depends on the person's personal preference. Haha. I see. I've never actually tried squirrel before, and there's definitely plenty of squirrels around here. It's something that I would be definitely interested in trying, just never really kind of got to it kind of thing. But that definitely sounds like fun coming up in squirrel hunting. I definitely have to say I'm lucky that I haven't seen a need for it yet because, you know, if they were all up in my garden and chewing up the garden, I'd probably would have eaten one by now. But it's mostly the rabbits actually. They haven't been too terrible, but there have been some rabbits that were kind of, you know, chewing on our trees and that kind of stuff, and I did deal with them, but I use them to actually feed the cats. So it's kind of one of those things where, you know, I don't want to take out all the rabbits, but every now and again you got to make sure they're not damaging what you need to harvest to feed you or your animals. But I might have to go squirrel hunting and give it a try. I could definitely see squirrel being like rabbit, being, you know, they're both rodents in that sense. And I've definitely like watched a lot of videos on like how to cook them and prepare them. So there's always been like in the back of my mind, I definitely have interest. Um, but okay. Um, I'm definitely like, I'm kind of a foodie person, and I feel that if you can harvest food off the land, that's like the best way to eat. But when it comes to not harming the population around you, raising your own animals is important in that sense. You know, you raise your own animals to be your main source of food, and then you use what nature provides to kind of supplement that food. So I definitely don't want to, you know, take out too many animals in that sense. But it's also, you know, protecting our livestock or our gardens from other animals. But it's kind of finding the balance between protecting and not being kind of frivolous with what we're taking from nature in that sense. Oh yeah, yes, rabbits definitely do breed a lot, which definitely makes me not feel like bad about taking them out because there's not a lot of predators around here. We mostly have coyotes, but like if you look in the history, there were a lot more foxes, a lot more birds of prey in that kind of sense. So in some areas around here, there is a insane amount of rabbits. I'm glad we're in an area where that isn't quite a problem, but it is nice though that there are rabbits around that I can feed us if I felt like it, but also our animals. So for large wildlife, so I'm from Montana, so we have almost all the same big wildlife. I'm not sure about moose. I don't know if there's any moose down here, but we have elk, whitetail, muleys, um, bobcats, and mountain lions. I'm sure there's bears around. I actually really don't know. I haven't really looked up a ton about bears, but I come from somewhere with a lot of bears. But there's definitely a lot of big wild game. But like hunting, like rules and regulations and stuff down here are definitely a lot more stricter than Montana, which I love because the animals down here are beautiful. Like their process of kind of preserving the animals for people to hunt, but also kind of limiting how many can be hunted and stuff. I really like that aspect down here. But it's really great that even though we're in kind of a deserty area, we're in the transition zone between the mountains of northern Arizona, and then kind of the really deserty area of southern. So we do have a really great animal population. Oh, and we have javelina down here as well. And if you're not familiar with javelina, they're actually kind of like, they're more a rodent than a pig, but they look a lot like a boar, but they have like a very mousy face. They're actually really cute, but very destructive at the same time. I wish I was good enough at my throwing knives to get a rabbit. For the most part, for rabbits, I have just like a little 22 rifle that I just go out and get one or two every now and again, or especially like getting up early in the morning or late in the evenings. I'll see one chewing on a garden bed and I'll go out and deal with that. I don't do snares because we have dogs, we have cats, and my chickens get out. And it's just one of those kind of safety precautions that if I set a snare, it's kind of one of those Murphy's Law kind of things. That if you set a snare for a rabbit, I'm going to end up getting my cat, or a trap or something for an animal. I'm probably going to get my cat or a chicken or something like that. So I don't do snares. I do know how to do snaring, but I try not to do that in the sense of it kind of depends on what kind of trap and snare. I like them to be as humane as possible. I don't like certain ones that just kind of choke things out. It's not my favorite. I'd rather just use a pew pew for that. But it would be nice if I didn't have animals kind of running around to kind of practice that. But at the same time, it's just good knowledge to have, but also just kind of not having snares out and about, because I don't want to get one of my animals or somebody else's animals, because every now and again we have other people's dogs and their critters coming around too. Yes, high desert. Definitely the high desert area. And it's actually super interesting because, so being from Montana, here in our area that we're in Arizona, it's super crazy similar. Montana was juniper ponderosa woods. Down here in Arizona, it's juniper ponderosa woods. Even the weather is pretty similar. It gets a little bit hotter for a little bit like longer during the day here in Arizona, but it's crazy how similar it is between here and Montana, except the winters. That's the hugest difference, is there's no winter for us. And in our Montana experience, there's no winter down here versus Montana where it's like 6 to 9 months of winter, and I'm really glad to be done with all of that. But trying to think. Okay, so I was talking about kind of chickens, getting chickens, deciding what kind of chickens you want, and the purpose of having those chickens. I think one of the most important things to really consider, as well as if you do plan on eating those animals, is having the knowledge on how to dispatch and clean them. But also if you have kind of the constitution in yourself, like if you were able to do that, and if you're not able to harvest an animal yourself, is finding a friend, a neighbor, another chicken tender, someone who can either help you do that or even do it for you, and kind of figuring out how that aspect of raising your chickens would be for you, because I think a lot of people kind of miss that fact. They'll get an animal that they want to eat, but when the time comes, they're not able to bring themselves to do that, which is totally valid, and I totally get it, because it's never easy. No matter how many times I've harvested, whether it was a goat or a chicken or a rabbit or even a wild animal, it's never easy, but it's also, there is a pride and a type of enjoyment when it comes to being able to provide fresh, good, healthy meat for, you know, your family and like the homestead, as well as like the cats and the dogs, because I really love being able to feed them raw meats. Like, cats and dogs are not supposed to eat dry, crunchy, processed kibble. They're meant to eat vegetation and mostly meat. So that's what I do my best to provide. So that is one reason I really enjoy being able to raise my chickens, is not meat for just us, but also for our other meat-eating critters. No Arizona Bigfoot yet. I've actually been kind of like, I like scary stories and stuff, and like lots of creepy stories and like Bigfooty type of stories happen in Arizona. So I've been kind of waiting for an interesting scenario to happen, but it definitely hasn't happened yet. But that's okay, because not that I'm afraid of the dark, but of what's in it. So I'm glad that nothing too crazy has happened yet, but it would be cool to see something interesting. So, oh no, I lost my place. So when deciding what animals you're gonna raise for meat, I think chickens are a good place to start when it comes to the harvesting process. They're a smaller animal and they're just easier to dispatch, because the bigger the animal gets, the harder it is to dispatch, and usually the bigger tool or more powerful tool you will need. And with chickens, there's not a million, but there's many different ways to dispatch a chicken. You know, some old school people just, it's a hatchet. You have the cone method, you have the broomstick method, you have the chain method. For me personally, I like the broomstick method the best. And if you're not familiar with that, in the future, I'll definitely do a video showing the full process. So I'll definitely like have like kind of warnings on that video. But I find it's the most easy to do because it's super quick. And if you do it with enough force, you can kind of just pop their head off and it's over and done. versus some of the other methods is kind of a little slower. It kind of goes to everybody's different kind of morals and values and what they deem as, I guess, humane. And so everybody has kind of a different feeling or sense of how they want to dispatch an animal. And it's kind of sucks, but trying out several different methods until you find one that you're most comfortable with, I think is the way to do it, because I did the cone method for a long time, but then I learned the broomstick method and I liked that. Like, it was kind of a game changer for me, and just the humaneness, I guess, of like dispatching a chicken. And so once you kind of know, the cone method is definitely one of the easiest ways. I can definitely agree with that. But I'm kind of, I don't know how to describe it. I'm kind of weird, I guess, when it comes to cutting an animal while they're alive. It's just not my favorite kind of method to do, because just it's just me. It's just my personal feels is really what it is. Especially because if you do it wrong, you can actually cut the wrong part of their neck and they can aspirate, and it's a little bit more traumatic, I guess. I think that's a good way to put it. For me, the least traumatic method of dispatch, in a sense, is one with the least blood and cutting, I guess, is kind of the best way that I can describe it. I can't remember what culture it is, but there's a culture where if you're going to harvest an animal, you can't spill blood. And for some reason, that kind of like vibes with me a little bit, if I can do it without any spilling of blood or using a sharp implement. And I find that the broomstick method, for me personally, is the easiest way. But people, like, I know tons of people who use the cone method, and that's totally groovy and legit. It really depends on how you personally want to dispatch an animal. And as I said, as the animal gets bigger, you kind of have less options. Usually it requires one of the bolt guns or an actual one, and it's a learning process, that is for sure. And I don't want to say everybody, but I'm pretty sure everybody who has gone through the process of starting to harvest their own animals has had a mess up. And for me, the broomstick method is the easiest one to not mess up. I would say it that way. But that's, like I said, me and my personal experiences. And once you kind of figure out kind of that aspect of what, the animal you want, how you're going to harvest that animal, who's going to do it for you, it's also thinking about where you're going to put it. If you're going to have 10 meat birds, you need to have the space to cure and freeze those 10 meat birds. Or if you're going to can some of them, if you're going to turn several of them into soup and then can it, it's figuring out what to do with the meat once you have it. And since we're off grid, we do have to be extra careful about that, because we're on solar, so we only have a small freezer, we only have so much space for whatever we're trying to preserve. And that's one reason I don't do meat birds, is because meat birds it's getting a little windy, storms rolling in, some more rain. But with meat birds, if I were to get 10 meat birds, all 10 of those meat birds need harvested around the same time. It can be really hard for a meat bird to have a good life after the fact, because, as I said, they grow just super quick. And at the time of harvest, when they're at weight, they can actually kind of break their own legs, they can have heart attacks. There's just so much growth pressure on their bodies that if you wait till too late after they should have been harvested, you can lose them, as in they pass away, and you don't want to eat a bird that has passed away. So that is time, money, and work that you have lost. So it's tricky when it comes to meat birds, because you have to harvest them all at once, versus having the dual purpose meat birds. I can harvest as I need them. So it's a better kind of process for us, especially being off grid. But if you have like all the energy you need, all the freezer space you need, meat birds are definitely a good option. And then when you're thinking about, okay, well, what kind of chickens specifically? Because you have barred rocks, you have Polish, you have buffs, you have silkies, you have bantams. There's so many kinds of chickens out there. It's definitely looking into your climate and picking a bird that can work with your climate. I personally like to recommend barred rocks as a starter chicken. I just love barred rocks. There's something about them that I just love to death. I will recommend, I do not like Rhode Island Reds. I don't know, they're just angry little birds for some reason. For me, I'm sure for other people they're great birds, but you know, it's picking Yep, a hatchet is definitely quick and painless, and it's the hatchet method is a lot like the broomstick method without the complete removal, I suppose, but the hatchet method is a very good way. And I definitely love small birds too. Um, and and the fact they love hatching eggs. But for me, the smaller birds just don't quite fit into just kind of my program. But I did breed Silky into my flock to help kind of encourage more broodiness into my birds. Um, because I do love small birds and I would love to have lots of small birds, but just with our way of life and being off grid, they tend to get snatched up a little easier. They tend not to be as cold hardy, which isn't as big of a deal now that we're in Arizona, but in Montana it was a little trickier making sure they were warm enough, frostbite and that kind of thing. But maybe one day now that we're in Arizona, I'll start up with some bantams and silkies again, maybe. But for me, my flock is actually just their mutts that I have bred over the 10 years we've been off grid, and I've been breeding for specific traits that I like, whether it's broody, they have good manners, you know, good meat production, good egg production, and that kind of thing. I'm glad that you are learning a lot. I definitely love to share everything that I have learned, and not to say, it's one of those things where it's always take what you hear with a grain of salt. Like, I'm telling you certain things, but always read more, look into things more, because these are my experiences and just what I have learned through my chicken tendering animal husbandry off-grid journey. And it's going to be different for everybody. Everybody's going to have different wants, they're going to have different needs. You know, they want more specific this or a more specific that. And the only way you can find out what those needs are for you is, of course, the research and reading, but also it's the experience. Sometimes you can do all the reading, all the learning, have all the prep work on the table, but then once you get into the thing, it's a whole different story. And so one of the things that I do like to kind of tell people is you got to try it. You got to do the thing before you know if you like to do the thing. But at the same time, in the beginning, it might be chaotic and hard and just obnoxious because you still have the learning curve of actually doing the thing. You have the book learning curve, but then you have the doing the thing learning curve. So if you are starting off with chickens or are nervous to get into chickens, it's very valid. It takes practice. It really does. And everybody has hiccups at some point. Some people's chicken journey goes perfect forever, and then there's this huge hiccup that they've just never experienced, and then there's a new learning curve about chickens that they have to deal with. And on the reverse side, some people deal with all the ridiculousness of chickens in like the beginning, so they learn all the things and then everything else kind of smooths out. Everybody's journey with chickens, or any animal for that matter, is there's going to be similarities, but it's going to be different for everybody. You know, and then being in Canada, like, so Montana is like right on the border of Montana. Like, we share a very cold climate together, and it is actually super crazy how well chickens can winter. The winter before we moved here, we had like -70s for a while, and like my chickens do super great. There's a couple of them, you know, if you have chickens with big combs, You probably don't want those chickens if you're in a really cold area because that's more prone to frostbite. And like in reality, even the -70s, that was the worst thing I ever dealt with when it came to those frigid temperatures, was a little bit of frostbite on the comb. But that is where I did start breeding in chickens with kind of the rose or squished comb. So I kind of started breeding out the tall forked comb a little more, so I wouldn't have to worry about that frostbite. But again, now that we're in Arizona, it's actually a big weight off our shoulders that we don't have to worry about animals as much in the winter, especially because the same winter I was talking about with the -70s, it threw all our goats into early labor, and that was insanity. That was definitely a crazy ordeal there, dealing with that cold and a bunch of like popsicle babies, like pretty literally. And with that in mind, if you live somewhere super cold and you have things like that happen, like, not to sound morbid in the sense, but an animal, especially a baby, is not dead until it is warm and dead. Because during that winter, I went out, and I mean frozen, almost stiff baby, and I shoved that baby in my shirt and just sat there and warmed it up, and it was like magic, and it was alive and did totally fine. So just cold climate tip for you: you warm that baby up, because sometimes they're not actually gone, they just need warmed back up to life, essentially. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I spent a long time growing these dreadlocks out. It's definitely just my ethnic mix gave me very brittle hair, and I was never able to grow it out. And I started dreadlocks, and it's pretty awesome to have like hair I can put up in a bouncy pony. So I appreciate that. How much feed do you go through with your chickens with a warmer winter? I'd say not quite as much. I guess I haven't paid a ton of attention to that. Honestly, I should maybe I'll have to kind of think about that more going through this coming winter. But I feel like it's definitely a bit less because they don't need as much energy to burn to stay warm. As well as having chickens down here, they go through molt a lot quicker. Like, they don't, like my chickens in Montana, they would have started molting at like the beginning of August and been done, like the whole flock. It takes a good 3 months for the whole flock to go through molt. Versus here, it seems like it's just a quick little molt, just a couple other feathers to keep them warm. So on top of that, they don't go through, like, as far as I can remember, they don't go through quite as much feed during the winter, but they also molt quicker. So I'm actually getting eggs for longer, as well as I get more eggs during the winter. So that's been pretty nice too. And so there's definitely been, I think it's more just the winter stress has just been a huge help when it comes to being off grid. Like, I loved Montana. I love doing off grid in Montana. But with the winter, you're essentially, during the summer, you're prepping for winter, and then you go through and deal with winter just to kind of turn around and prep for winter again. In the sense, because, like, homesteading and being off grid, there's kind of that prepper aspect about it, especially depending on how off grid you are. You need to be prepared for whatever it may be. And in Montana, we could be snowed up in the mountains for like a long time. So we had to make sure we were prepped and prepared, not just us, but for our animals, for those scenarios, and not having to worry about needing to be so prepared that it's not going to get no -70, that my goats can probably very happily have their babies in the middle of winter and it wouldn't be a big deal, has been a really great bonus, especially not worrying about, having frozen chicken nuggets in the morning, going out into the coop worrying who's way too cold and froze to death. And it's been really wonderful. I really appreciate not having those winter worries anymore. It's really helped just the overall process, and the fact that we can actually work and do things outside during the winter is still kind of crazy to me, because in Montana, sometimes the days don't get above -20 and the sun is shining and beautiful, and then you go outside and it's -20. Versus here in the winter, if it looks nice and sunny, you go out, it might be a little chilly, but you're still able to like go out and do things and not freeze the whole time. And so it's it's been really nice being in Arizona versus Montana and kind of the weather. We've definitely thought a lot about, so I should probably kind of read the questions before I answer them maybe. So ever think about getting livestock like a cow maybe? Yes, but no. We won't be getting some, like maybe, but no. Because something that a lot of people kind of miss, like I grew up in Montana working on a ranch and working with cows, working with horses and sheep and all the animals and stuff. And when you work with cows, like you can definitely have like a really sweet pet cow that's very easy to work with. But at the same time, if she wants to be mean or have a bad attitude, especially if you're wanting to breed cows, you need a bull. Or you can borrow a bull, but it's easier to just have your own bull. And bulls can be very scary, but also a mama cow can be very scary. And so when it comes to which animals we want to raise, kind of the smaller is better because we can better, like I can wrestle a huge goat to the ground. Like it might not be fun, but if I needed to wrestle a goat to the ground for whatever reason, whether it was to pluck porcupine quills out of its nose, to deal with a wound or things like that, I can do that with a goat. With a cow, you can't. You can't manhandle, I guess, in a sense, a cow to be able to deal with health issues or maybe help with birthing. It's much harder to do on a larger animal. As well as if we wanted cows for meat, that's a whole lot of meat that we would have to find. You know, we could sell some, most definitely, but even then if we had half a cow, that's more meat than we could handle. So we prefer to keep our animals on the smaller side with our goats. And even though goats are a raging pain in the buttocks, I love goats. I really enjoy them. I love their milk. I love the fact, kind of the other fact too is if you have a cow and milk, that's a ton of milk. Like I don't think people realize that one cow can give you just insane amounts of milk. And like we could give it to the dogs and the cats and the chickens and do a lot of things with it, but even then that's a lot of milk to have to figure out what to do with every single day. So having goats who give you a little bit less milk, it's helpful in that manner. Because cows are wonderful and I definitely want a cow. But when it comes to what we're trying to do, a cow is just too big, as well as they eat a lot. Like, you know, one cow will eat as much as like 10 goats, not literally, but cows eat a crap ton versus goats. I mean, they eat a lot too, but you know, comparatively, you know, it kind of depends on what you can do and like what your land can handle as well. If you have a cow, are you going to pasture raise it? How much hay do you need to bring in? When it's the same with the goats, but cows, they're just more. They need more water, they need more food comparatively if you have several goats. And when it comes to meat, you know, I can handle one goat. If we harvest one goat, I have enough freezer space. I can handle the curing and the processing much easier than if it was a whole cow. Ernie's Cabin says winter was very long here and they had a few frosts. And that's crazy that, like, was it just frosts? Because Montana has already gotten like a whole bunch of snow. And I secretly laugh at my friends up there, be like, haha, winter's already there and we still have like a month before we get snow. But yeah, I definitely don't miss the early frosts. We have a longer growing season. I really appreciate Arizona weather. Like we did kind of trade a little bit more hot for a very long winter, but that little bit of hot is much more manageable than all that cold. Dead Wolf Resistance, hello there. Yeah, definitely taking care of cattle. There's a lot of people took care of a lot of sheep and goats. Yeah. And that's kind of the thing is a lot of people who haven't worked with like sheep, goats, cows, you know, they miss a lot of all they're like big things, but it's all the little things that you have to deal with. Like if I'm trying to think of like an example. So like for an example, you know, if a cow has porcupine quills in the nose, that cow either has to be calm enough to rope and hog tie and be able to keep that cow in place to pull those quills, or you need a giant head catch, which are just like these big metal cages, and it's like a chute. You put the cow through and it locks their head so you can sit there and pick out quills. Versus a goat, I can wrestle a goat and pluck out quills and that kind of thing. And a lot of people just don't understand how much work and almost risk a bigger animal is, because one good kick to a cow from a cow could take out your knee. And like a goat could probably do that too, but not as thoroughly as a cow could, because cows are, they're a lot of work, and they're big, and that's the thing, they're huge. They're this big animal that could easily squish you like a bug, and so I'd rather have littler animals that we can, it just helps, it helps us be able to help them better when they're smaller. It's just easier for us to be able to do those things. Oh, North Dakota. Okay, so you're up from where I came from. So if you haven't heard or known, I'm from Montana. So you definitely know the weather and that kind of stuff that Montana deals with as well. And I have to say I'm glad I don't have to deal with no more of that winter. So Ruben Arveo, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. What about a mule? Uh, and yes, and they're a great pack animal. I definitely would love a mule. That is definitely either that or like an oxen, which I know it's kind of the, I don't want a cow, but I'd love an oxen, because if you ever worked with an ox, they're amazing. They're so cool and chill. But not that I'd ever actually get one, but I secretly want one. But a mule would be great because they are a good pack animal. They're a great work animal, as well as they are a kind of protective animal. The only downer in this, just in the sense to me, is depending on how we would it can be hard to integrate mule and goats, because mules for some reason don't like goats very much sometimes. And so maybe one day, but it's definitely a future thing, especially that we restarted the homestead down here. We need to build back up to essentially where we were in Montana before we think about getting anything too exciting. Because in reality, I want all the animals. I want emus and ostriches, and I want horses and cows. I want them all. But when it comes to just kind of our goals and way of life, I suppose, we're kind of avoiding bigger animals until we have a true purpose for them. So a mule, that would be something great if we're I really want to get one of the old school plows where you tack it onto a mule or a horse or an ox and it pulls. If we ever ended up in that kind of scenario, that is where we'd probably bring in a mule. But we'd also want more vegetation, more pasture for that to be raised on. And that's why, if you're familiar with Brandon's channel and Greening the Desert, we're trying to bring back what once was, because there used to be a lot more growth here, a lot more grass. We're trying to bring that back, not only for the nature, but also to be able to supplement our animals to help feed costs. Man, sometimes they get way expensive. But maybe one day a mule, because that is something I would definitely love to acquire. Just, I would love to have a big animal, I really would, but just not yet. Yeah, it's definitely helpful when it's very tame, and it definitely helps with animals when they're very tame and trained. And it's definitely the equipment. The equipment's kind of the big part, especially because just my personal experiences, I'll say in the sense that we would have bottle calves, and they'd be very tame, and we'd train them and work for them or work with them, but something sometimes would happen, and that's still a big old animal to deal with, and it's that equipment. You really need the equipment for big critters, especially good fencing. Kind of, you don't want any, all animals are terrible escape artists, but it's also the kind of the fencing thing when it comes to bigger animals, because even just 10 acres, creating that much, building that big of a fence, that's a big project. It's a lot of money, and we do want that at some point, but that is kind of one of the other hindrances to bigger animals, is we want good fencing to keep them here, keep them safe, and just kind of that aspect. So we have, Ernie's cabin asked how many acres we have. We have 10 acres. We sort of have, it's like a group of people. We all bought 10 acres on a 40 plot. So we're doing kind of earthworks on kind of the full 40, but we have our own 10 acres that we are really working on and working with. And honestly, a lot of people may think that 10 acres isn't that much when it's actually a lot. Like, depending on what you're doing, if you're trying to graze herds of cattle, it's definitely not that much. But 10 acres is a lot of space to work with, to be on, and to be trying to figure out what you're doing with that land. And for us, it's a lot of rotational grazing, trying to bring back native species, um, just slowly revitalizing, trying to bring back what was here because a lot has been lost due to the cattle. Yes, definitely build lots of fences. We we kind of are trying to decide whether we want to do like we do want the solid fence all the way around, but we might start off kind of more with paddocks since the main reason for fencing is for the animals. So we might just start off doing like little paddocks and we'll move them from paddock to paddock all through the property. Of course, not like the whole property paddocked off, but yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do, and Dead Wolf Resistance said that he's built fences, and I don't miss building fences. Growing up, we would do a lot of T-posts and barbed wire, and I'm glad I know how to do it, but I'm not excited for when we start doing it because, well, it's fun, it's good for the soul, labor. It's a lot of work, especially if you don't have the equipment, and we don't have the equipment. We'd be putting those posts in by hand, and that's good workout. You don't need a gym if you're off grid doing all your own work, which is a bonus. But and that's kind of talking about fencing and that kind of thing, kind of just going back on the chicken train just a little bit. When it comes to chickens, depending on how you want to do things, your property, predators, if you have livestock guardian dogs, all the little things that come with chickens kind of thing, you do have to decide on how you want to raise your chickens because you can have free range, you can have partial free range, you can have them in a coop and a run. And to me, they're all valid. I definitely like my birds to be free ranged, but here in Arizona, the one biggest predator issue we have is that coyotes are active all the time. In Montana, we have winter where they're not as active. Just it's too snowy. It's too hard for them to get to the chickens in general, and because the chickens are just kind of in the coop because they don't want to be out in the snow. But because we don't have that winter barrier in the sense from the coyotes here in Arizona, I've seen coyotes at all times during the day, and it's kind of similar in Montana during the summers. But coyotes around here, like, even though there's lots of rabbits, I feel like there's still not enough food for them kind of thing. Like, they seem a little bit more desperate is the only way I can think of it, because like we could chase off the same coyote all day long and it just doesn't go away because it's just that hungry and it can't find anything else except my chickens. So we can't free range down here. I do let them range, like if I'm home I'll let them out of their area, we'll walk about, but also we have to be careful with letting our chickens free range because we're trying to plant trees and bring back vegetation, and we can't really let them do what they want until we have things more established where they're not going to go and just like decimate the tree kind of aspect. Ruben, my grandmother on her ranch used natural material for a fence like cactus and thorn bushes. After they dried out, they worked pretty well. Yeah. So we do want to do some of that kind of natural fencing, like deadwood hedges and that kind of thing. That's actually something Brandon's been working on. We have all this old growth juniper, and before anybody says anything, these are mostly native juniper. We do not have, I mean, there's some, we don't have any of like the invasive juniper, but Brandon's been pruning them all and cleaning all of them up, and he's been starting to create dead hedges. I really do want to do some cactus barriers. I'm slowly starting to propagate prickly pears because not only can they make a good fence, but you burn off all the little thorns and you can feed it to your goats. If you had cows, we can eat it, and then they make fruit, and so you can have the jelly or the juice and that kind of thing. And then as well as like certain trees, once we get everything kind of slowly groove in. We'll start planting trees along the property line to create, use the dead wood, use cactus, use trees, and to create that natural fence. But we do kind of also want like a legit fence, because then if we have a legit fence, it's harder for the cows to come in. Because again, if you don't know cows are extremely clumsy and destructive, and they will wipe out a whole garden in like 10 seconds, which has happened actually down here already. Ernie's cabin, goats are great for hanging around with you. Less fencing needed if you can put it up with their with their personality. Yes, no, definitely. The goats are pretty great. We actually do intensive rotational grazing, so they are in a paddocked pen area that gets scooted every day. And Brandon has been working on making bigger paddocks for them. But one day, yes, we would like them to just kind of run and graze around, because that's what we did in Montana for a long time, is they just kind of did what they want and went to bed when they want, and it was definitely dealing with their personalities. But we were lucky, though, that they weren't car jumpers, so they wouldn't jump on the cars, which is probably the best thing about those goats. And I hope that once we kind of get back into the more free-rangey groove, that they still stay off vehicles. Esther May asks, are you worried about the coyotes? So yes, but this might be kind of like something people don't like to hear in a sense, but like, not that they're disposable, I don't mean it that way, but when you have animals, you have to deal with nature. And to me personally, cats are not, no animal technically is meant to be an indoor animal. And this is just my personal kind of morals and values. I ain't dogging anybody or anything, but animals are not meant to be in a house. They are meant to be outside. And so it does suck when it comes to the cats. We have lost a couple of cats here to the coyotes, which was really new for us, because in Montana we had never lost a cat to coyotes. And we have lost a couple was it last year? We did lose a couple cats, but we're honestly not sure if it was the coyotes or if it was a bobcat, because there was this weird correlation. We'd see a bobcat and then a cat would go missing, and some people like a cat doesn't eat a cat, and I promise you that is a thing. But so I've definitely been working with them a little bit more. I've trained the cats a little bit more so they don't wander out as far. But the biggest thing with the cats is they're actually super important for us to have, because there is a literal infestation of mice and pack rats here, because again, there's not as many predators, not as many birds of prey, foxes, and as well coyotes. Like, there are lots of coyotes, but there's not as many as there used to be, because people want to take them all out. And so there is a huge infestation of all the rodents around here. And if you're trying to grow plants, it's near impossible. And it was insane when we first got here. There was a pack rat nest in every single tree. For the first year we were here, our cats were bringing back like 2, 3, 5 pack rats a night. So it's really important for us to have cats to help with that issue, but it does risk losing cats to predators. But to me, it's the same as having chickens, having goats, having even our dogs, in a sense, are at risk of a coyote attack, or even a javelina, or, the off chance, like a mountain lion or something. And to me, when it comes to being off grid, all animals have a job. And sometimes that job can be dangerous for them, and it definitely is really hard on me, and it sucks when we lose whatever animal, whether it's a cat or a chicken, to nature. But at the same time, that's just how nature works. Nature eats nature. That is like the fundamental thing of nature. So we do our best to protect our animals. We have our dogs. That's one reason the fencing is important, to help deter. But we're home most of the time and that kind of thing. So we do our best to protect our animals, but nature is nature. And if nature's hungry, it's gonna eat. And so we do worry, we do our best, especially after losing a couple of cats, and we haven't lost any for a while, so that hopefully we've made enough presence here and they just don't want to be around as much, because we haven't seen them too much, the coyotes, this year, which has been really nice. So friction hitch, I had to get rid of one of my dogs because he likes to tear apart chickens. Do you have experience with dogs to get them to be protective rather than a problem? I don't know what I did wrong. So that sounds like our dogs to kind of a degree. So the hardest part about having dogs on a homestead is that you need the proper livestock guardian dog, which are like Pyrenees, Anatolians. What is the other one I'm trying to think of? The specific livestock guardian dogs, and even Pyrenees tend to be a little notorious for eating chickens, because the thing we try to do is we take a dog that has been trained or bred for one thing and we try to make it do another, and sometimes it can work out really well, sometimes it doesn't, because our dogs are actually Pit, Pyrenees, and Husky mixes, and we got them in the very beginning when we were off grid. And at first they were great because they literally like lived in the chicken coop with the chickens. Like if we had to run into town for something and we didn't want to leave the puppies in the house for them to poop and pee and chew up everything, they just hang out with the chickens, and it was wonderful. It was the best thing ever. But then we started having issues with other people's dogs coming onto the property, and our dogs decided to be friendly to those dogs when we wanted them to like bark and chase them away. They ended up being friendly with those dogs, and there was a point where we actually caught it on our camera that those other dogs started killing the chickens, and then our dogs joined in and they had a blast eating, not even eating, but they killed all the chickens. And since then our dogs cannot be trusted with chickens. One is worse than the other, and we have tried almost every trick under the sun besides like the really mean ones. So, you know, some people say beat it out of them. That really doesn't, it's not, no. But we've tried everything under the sun, including like training like a trainer person. And it is kind of one of those things that once it happens, it's bound to happen again. And there's so many things that can happen with a dog. Like it's kind of light switches. You turn a light switch on, oh, chicken is delicious, and that idea is never gonna kind of leave. And so for us, our dogs, when they're out and about, they're being babysat. They are with us. Otherwise, they're on leads or in their pen, and we try to keep them switched around and try not to keep them in one place for too long. But at night, they actually have leads that are next to the chickens, because that's the main thing that we need protected are the chickens. And it can be really hard to have a dog and work with them, to work with farm animals, because if they're not bred, if they're not the breed for that job, it can just lead to trouble. And so I definitely can't really say that we've been able to fix the problem. We ourselves, we're not going to get rid of our dogs because we don't want to pass on that problem to somebody else, essentially. And that's not, I'm not trying to say anything negative. Sometimes you do just have to rehome a dog for whatever situation. But for us, it's constantly working with them. Like, so we have two dogs. We have Susalon and Lazaron, and they're very opposite. Susalon is very excitable and just always wants to play, always wants his toy, and he is the worst one when it comes to getting a hold of a chicken. Like, he can be around, like if we're around and he's around, he's fine. But if we're not, or like if we turn our head and a chicken runs by him, he gets really excited, and then the chicken gets scared and gets excited, and then the dog gets more excited, and then he offs the chicken. So it's like, it's a cross between play and prey, and he knows they're delicious, versus like Lazaron, he just like wants to sniff the chicken's butt. So he'll just kind of chase the chicken but not try to hurt the chicken exactly, but if he did get his hands on it, he'd probably eat the chicken. But for our dogs, I'm very grateful that they don't do it for sport. If they catch a chicken, they kill the chicken, they're gonna eat it. They'll eat it. So I'm definitely grateful for that aspect, I guess. Cause like in a sense, our plan is these boys are they're getting old. They're about 9. So here in the next year or so, I would like to get I really want an Anatolian livestock guardian dog, and just rigorous working with them, training, time, patience, practice. It's a lot of work to have a dog that gets along with animals. Not always. Like sometimes a random dog is just like the best animal dog ever. You know, it's kind of random in a way when it comes to other breeds, but it's definitely needing a livestock guardian dog to actually do the livestock guarding. I hope that kind of answered the question. Yeah, and sometimes it is. Sometimes the dog just doesn't belong on a homestead. I totally agree with that. And it's a hard thing to deal with, but that is just kind of the truth of the matters. Some of them can and some of them can't. And it's definitely when it comes to, you know, they're your pet and you love them, it can be a hard decision on what to do. And for us, since our dogs are working dog pets kind of thing, we've just been able to work with them enough that we haven't had any entire flock massacres in probably like 6 years, because it was a long time ago when they got really bad for a minute, but we've worked with them enough that they're not so much of a problem. Oh, I bet in Newfoundland, I bet they would be a great like homesteady type of dog. They're just so big and sweet. Like, I'm a little jealous. But for us, like, I have thought about getting like a big dog like that. But the trick for us is I try to raise enough chickens, mostly the roosters, to feed the dogs, and keeping up with just my dogs. Like, dogs eat so much, Lord. Like, because our dogs, they get fruits, all sorts of vegetables, all sorts of meats when we have it available. You know, if I harvest a goat, they get all the extra bits and the bones and all that good stuff. And feeding a big old dog, man, just a Pyrenees. I'm gonna need to definitely hatch a lot more chickens. Ernie's cabin, and that's what we did with our pups. We raised our dogs with the birds, but it was just this weird situation where these other dogs started eating the chickens and they joined in, and from then on they were more food than friend. But that definitely is a huge part of it, especially with chickens, because chickens are everything's prey. Is definitely raising your dog like beak to snout with a chicken its whole life. That is one of the best ways for them to see chickens as friends, not food. But in the sense though, it doesn't always work. Like, it can for some people. It can be a fail-safe way to do things for some people. For other people, not so much. Like, everybody has such a different experience when it comes to whatever they're doing, like in just life in general, in that sense. You know, some people can raise their dog with chickens its whole life and it still eats chickens. Some people can raise a dog with chickens its whole life and it would never think about nibbling off a feather. You know, every dog has such a different personality. Every person has a different personality, and how they're going to work with that dog and how they're going to train with that dog. Dogs are they're really tricky because so like I worked on a ranch and they had several sets of Pyrenees, but they also had herding dogs. They had collies and certain shepherds, and like there's just lots of dogs on this ranch. And something that I learned very quickly was those Pyrenees had to protect the other livestock from the other dogs. So just because a dog is a ranching dog doesn't mean it's a guardian dog. Like, it could be, but it's not meant for that. You know, a herding dog is meant to herd cows. A guardian dog is meant to guard. You know, a nanny dog like a pit bull is meant to nanny. Just examples kind of thing. And sometimes when you swap jobs, it doesn't always work. Friction hitch, is an incubator worth it, or do I just let a brooder do her thing? So that is definitely, in a sense, up to you and your goals. Because when it comes to a broody chicken, you never know how good of a broody chicken that chicken might be, because you can have a chicken that will sit on the eggs the whole time, hatch out chicks, and then abandon the nest and not want anything to do with the babies. Or she might eat her babies or hurt her babies, or she doesn't protect her babies. Or sometimes they're really finicky where they'll sit for like a week and then be like, oh, I'm done, and not sit on those eggs. Sometimes you just don't get a broody bird. That's why I bred Silky into my flock, was so I know that someone will go broody. So for just my personal kind of opinion and experience, both. You want an incubator, But a broody is like, if you get a good broody bird that will sit on those eggs, hatch those eggs, and raise those eggs, it's fabulous because you don't have to do like anything. Sometimes you have to separate them into their own space, but it's wonderful. But having an incubator as well is really good backup, because say something happens to mama hen, or she abandons the nest halfway through, or right when they're hatching, she's like, nope, I'm done. You can take those eggs and you can put them into the incubator and you can still get chicks. The only downer is with an incubator is you have to do all the brooding and the rearing of the chicks. So for me, broody is great, but it's not promised. An incubator has a promise. It does take practice to kind of figure out how to incubate and hatch eggs successfully, but for the most part, an incubator is for sure. A broody bird is not. They're more finicky, if you will. Hold on, my phone is dying. There we go. So when it comes to is it worth it, it kind of depends on you. For me, it's very worth it because I want to hatch out, not like as many chicks. Like I want to hatch out all the chicks. I want to have like 1,000,000 birds, but I need to make sure that I have enough chickens to not only to replenish my hens, but I also want to make sure I have lots of roosters for meat for us and meat for the dogs and meat for the cats. So for me, an incubator is kind of a must, versus other people, if it's more kind of hobby or you're just wanting some babies, a broody bird can be great for that too, and not needing the incubator. But I think that if you have a broody bird that you're gonna let try and hatch, to have an incubator as backup. Because for me, it's a 3 strikes you're out rule, not like eating the hen, but I'll let a hen try to hatch eggs 3 times. The first time is total practice on her part. She has no idea what she's doing. She doesn't know if she actually wants to. Sometimes they do. And so the first time they try to hatch, you'll have a good idea of how good of a mom she could be. So like for example, if the first time she hatches, the chicks hatch out and then she abandons them. Okay, she might be a good brooder, but it doesn't mean she's a good mom, if that makes sense. Like she might not raise the chicks. She might sit on them, because I call her Void. She is my perpetually broody bird. Those eggs will hatch and she'll come out of the nest, but then like 3 days later, she just wants to sit on eggs again. So because she's good at hatching eggs, I let her keep hatching. I just take the babies. But if, say, the first time a bird hatched eggs and she started eating them, no more, she is not allowed to sit on eggs ever again. She does not get to brood. And so you give them a couple of tries and see what they do and kind of decide if they're gonna be a good brooder and a mama, or just a good brooder. And it kind of takes time. It takes some time to figure that out, which can be helpful if you have a very broody bird. But if you have like a not so broody bird, it can be a pain in the butt, because she'll sit for a minute, then she won't, then she will, and then she gives up, or she breaks all the eggs in her nest. Broody birds are definitely a pain in the butt. They're like, a broody bird is like a mini goat. They're just, you have no idea what they're gonna do or how mean they're gonna be, if they're gonna be a pain in the butt or not. I definitely, both. A broody bird is great. I love being able to just have a bird do the all natural thing. It's fabulous. You don't have to do anything. You have to watch a little bit, but incubator as a backup. That's my recommendation. Friction hitch, or no, Felix Fisher. Do the cats ever go after the chicks? Not really, because I'm very good at always having chicks around, and the kittens, so our line of cats came from Montana. Like we've had this line of cats for about 10 years. And all the babies have been raised with chicks. It got to the point where mama would just have her babies in a chicken's nest. And I would have mama hens try to steal kitten babies. Like I have a couple, I think I have a short that shows one of the little stories. There was this year where the mama hen stole the kittens, but then my cat wanted to take one of her babies. So she kept picking up this little chick and bringing it in with her babies. But it's definitely working with the cats, working with the chickens. When you introduce cats to chicks, like kittens to chicks, they will grow up knowing each other as kind of friend, not foe. Every now and again, I do have to like, they'll like chase play, but I've never had an issue where my cats are like killing my chicks. And there actually is another short in my shorts that there's like all the cats and then there's all these little chicks over here, and the cats really, they'll sit and watch them sometimes, but the cats really don't pay them any mind. And that is just because the cats are and have been just always around the chickens, and I think there's just something in a cat's head that they go, okay, that's not my bird. I can't eat that bird. And sometimes they'll play with the birds, but they're not actively trying to like hurt the birds. And it's definitely been like a progression over time to have my cats be that way. Friction hitch. I didn't ever think about the momming part. Thank you. Oh, yes, yes. Like there's so many just like little things that, like, I mean, it's goats, it's chickens, it's whatever animal you have, there's so many little layers into each thing that you might want them to do. Like if you're breeding goats, you have to, how's the bloodline? How's mom's attitude? What's dad's attitude like? What are their body features? What body features are you looking for? But then it's after the birth, and just how good was the birth? Even for like a chicken, if you have a chicken who has trouble laying eggs, you might not want to hatch her eggs because you might be perpetuating that problem. So it's the same thing with like goats. If a goat has trouble with labor each year, you probably don't want to keep running that line. If you have a mom who's mean to her baby or those kinds of things, you have to decide if you need to nip that in the bud before you continue the line. Because like for example, roosters, there's this whole thing about mean roosters. And how I understand it essentially is that through commercialism and needing a bajillion eggs to feed everybody, we have bred out the broody, the hen's desire to sit and hatch eggs and be a good mama. We've bred that out because when a chicken becomes broody, they stop laying eggs. When it comes to commercial production, you need her to lay eggs. So we bred out the broody, but in turn, we've also bred out the maternal instincts in the roosters, which has essentially turned them to be more aggressive. They don't have that kind of loving, caring man rooster in them anymore, and we have a more aggressive version. And after I started breeding Silky into my flock, breeding back in the broody, only breeding the sweetest roosters, I don't have mean roosters anymore. Every now and again I'll get one with attitude, but not ones that will like take my eye out, because I almost had that happen. And that's where I decided that I'm not going to deal with mean roosters anymore, because for a long time I really tried to work with them, but I had one like come up my face and I had this like big old gouge like down my eye, and I literally almost lost my eyeball. And so for me, mean roosters, they're a risk. And especially because I had like little siblings and my nephew and stuff coming to the farm in Montana, no mean roosters. And because we eat roosters anyway, that's what we raise them for, but I still want sweet roosters. So like I breed not only for looks, but disposition, attitude, how motherly or fatherly or maternal they are. I think that's super important when it comes to having future generations that are also good parents with those good traits that you want. And it just makes them easier to work with. Friction hitch. I hate to take over your stream. Oh, no worries. But since there's room, I'll ask you. With feed, I've been doing some foraging, but do you do any of the black larva thing? Yeah. So yes, I do foraging. I don't exactly do the black soldier fly larva. I really want to get into it, but I call it lazy maggots, where essentially you take a bucket, you poke a bunch of holes in the bottom, like eighth of an inch, not quite a quarter, like maybe eighth of an inch holes in the bottom, not a ton, but enough. And then those same holes like 2 or 3 inches up the side of the bucket, and you fill it full of like rotten meat and stuff like that. Like, not to be too gross, but I'll put goat heads in there. If I harvest a goat, I'll put a goat head in there. Or like if you have meat that goes bad, or even sometimes when a chicken passes away. Some people might not agree with this, but I'm pretty good at knowing why a chicken passed away. And if it was just like a heart attack, I'll feed it to my dogs, or the cats. But if I'm like, I don't know why this chicken passed away, I'll put it in a rot bucket, and the maggots will come in and they'll fall out the little holes. And in the process of the maggots like eating stuff, they actually can like break down bad stuff. So I raise maggots more than anything. But I also, if I don't know if it works the same everywhere, but you take a piece of plywood and you spray the ground and you lay the plywood on top of it, and you'll get a bunch of bugs under there. And in the mornings, or however long you leave it there, you flip it up and there's a bunch of bugs under there for your chickens. I really want to do crickets as well. Crickets are just super easy. You put them in there, you feed them sometimes, and you'll have a zillion crickets. And then we also do worms. We have worm farms. So I actually raise worms, not just for the gardens and for worm castings, but also to feed the chickens. Like if I can raise any sort of bug in some fashion, I definitely want to give it a try, because it's good protein, and it's just like foraging and being able to free food for the chickens. As much as I can create, that's what I'm gonna do. Ernie's Cabin, you're so right. Every animal is different. Important to learn their personalities. Exactly. And especially, like, to me, that is the most important thing when it comes to breeding, is you want to know the animal and you want to know their personalities, because there is a genetic personality trait that is passed down. I don't know how. I don't want to get like all up into it too much, because some people don't agree, but for example, in the very beginning of our goat journey, excuse me, we adopted a couple of goats and they were just in terrible condition. So to me, it was a little more of a rescue. But we brought them in, and the female was extremely skittish. I mean, super skittish, and she was really hard to work with. And because we couldn't get a hold of her, she ended up getting with the male, and she had babies. And she was a great mom, but her skittishness went right to the baby. And even though we worked with this baby a lot, like we were always holding and cuddling this baby, there was a point where it became just as skittish as its mom. And we ended up having some people's dogs come onto the property, tear our dogs up, tear up our goats, and we lost the mom. And so we were thinking, I don't mean this in a negative way, but now that skittish mom is gone, maybe this baby will be better. The baby never got better. Her babies were also skittish, and just had this skittish personality trait. It wasn't so much that they were afraid, because if you had food, they'll come right up and be just fine. But as soon as you don't have food, they're like, I'm out of here. And there's just other kind of breeding instances where I definitely notice if the parents have that attribute, the kids will too. And so we kind of stopped that breeding line so that we have more workable animals. And to me, personality, knowing the personality and the personalities of the animals you're breeding, will help develop into an animal that you can more comfortably work with, if that makes sense. Felix Fisher, I know this is about chickens, but how is the building coming along? The building's coming along quite nicely. We've been inside for a while now, since like the end of April or so, and it definitely kept us cool through the summer. I mean, we still have a lot of work to do, so it kept us cooler in the summer, but was so much better than the tent. It's like a castle with air conditioning compared to the tent. But just to kind of state that we gotta have some things going on where you might not see a lot of the build for a while. Just people. We'll just leave it there. But the build is going wonderfully. We still, like I said, we still have work to do, but it's really nice being able to cook inside and be inside and not be in a tent during the wind and the rain and all that good stuff. I definitely appreciate you asking. Friction Hitch. I think that what you're doing is important work. I respect you and I love you guys so much. Don't give up. I will share your streams. We'll keep growing. Thank you very much. I super appreciate it. We definitely love what we do. You know, it's our lifestyle and it's what we enjoy doing. Like we tried I grew up in a super tiny town, super ranchy, and Brandon grew up in a big city. So we kind of come from like opposite sides of the train tracks. But, you know, the off-grid lifestyle, you know, developing your land, raising and growing your own food. Like it's such a joyful, fulfilling way to be, in kind of like a primitive kind of way. I don't know how else to describe it, because, you know, harvesting your own meat and curing that meat and making it last, and preserving it to eat later and stuff, like it's such a primal, important kind of skill, or at least knowledge to have. And for us to be having, you know, our lifestyle kind of encompassing trying to sustain ourselves with as little external input, which it takes a lot of external input to get to the point where you don't need it anymore, but working towards that it's super fulfilling, and we love it. And I definitely appreciate you coming on to the live stream. And oh wow, it's been a long live stream. Thanks for everybody who's hung around for so long. But we definitely love this lifestyle, and, you know, a big part of this lifestyle is raising livestock, whether it be chickens, goats. Ernie's Cabin, well, thank you for coming by. I super appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. And we'll definitely be doing these more often. They're kind of fun. And I'll try to always kind of keep it on a topic about something, but definitely like throw comments of like, hey, talk about this, or hey, talk about that. I can re-talk about stuff. I don't mind. I can talk about this stuff all day. But yes, stewardship. That's definitely what it's like. It's we're the gardeners, we're the protectors, we're animals who live on Earth, who can help the animals on Earth, kind of thing is how I see it. You know, we've got these opposable thumbs and this weird tongue that allows us to create words, and we can use those things to create better environments, not only for nature but for us, and to be able to provide for ourselves. And that's really the most fulfilling aspect about this lifestyle. And in a sense, to kind of like tie it back to chickens, it's, you know, chickens were the first animal that we started with when we went off grid, and how amazing it was when we got our first eggs. Like, these birds were pretty much totally free ranged at that time, barely had to feed them. It was fabulous. But you get these eggs, and it's like all this hard work and their hard work and everything accumulating into this little orb of delicious goodness that can feed us, can feed the dogs, can feed the cats. And just every day, you know, I have that feeling of how amazing is this, that we can raise these animals, whether it's to eat or to not, to have pets, to grow a garden. It's super fabulous, and we just really love this lifestyle. And in a sense, it's a lifestyle, but it's your whole lifestyle. Like, this isn't just you get to a point and you're done. It is a continuation of building, growing, harvesting, breeding, planting, mulching, just so many things. And it's like every day, all the time, and it's super fabulous. But I think I've been talking for long enough. But there's definitely more to cover about chickens, so maybe the next live, it'll be kind of the same. We'll kind of talk about more about chickens, and maybe just some random things that I can think about of them, or leave in the comments something as specific as you can that you'd like me to like ramble on about, and you can ask questions about, and I will do my best to share whatever experience I may have. And I think the rain is coming, so I think it's a good time to end the live. I super appreciate you all joining, and it's super exciting. I'm super excited to have a decent live, because my first one didn't go so good, so I'm glad this one did better. And I'll keep them up. I'll keep coming on and doing lives, and hopefully soon I'll be getting back into some mudding. So maybe that'll be a good live topic one of these days, is mud, adobe and cob and all that goodness. But I'm starting to feel some sprinkles, so I better head on inside. Thank you all for joining my live. I super appreciate you all, tons and tons.